channels. So, okay, I'm just setting this up. Okay, we are live on YouTube now. I'm just going live on Insta as well. And yeah, I am adding Jhilmil, and I've sent you an invite on Insta.
Okay, it says watch. I don't know if I can join.
Adding Jhilmil.
I just says.
And I've sent you an invite on Insta.
It says watch. I don't know if I can join.
Okay, we need to do something for the echo. Maybe both of us can use earphones.
I will turn this off as well because this is what I've done yesterday. Turned off the sound. How's that?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, I hate using earphones. So.
Fair. And yeah. Okay, just waiting for Jhilmil to join us on Insta as well.
I'm sort of here. I'm just making sure that my phone is all right, but it's still giving a funny voice, right?
Yeah. Oh God. Okay. We will need to figure out a way to stop the echo. I think you might need to use your earphones.
Okay.
Okay, guys, we're just figuring out the audio, but yeah, we're super excited to talk about minority mental health today, and we have Jhilmil Breckenridge with us, who has a really fascinating background and perspective on the issue. So she's been working with gender and violence and a lot of post-colonial subtext that exists in the way that we practice mental health right now in any country. And Jhilmil is also doing some really interesting work in her doctoral thesis right now as well, which is what we were talking about just before we started this AMA. So yeah, so just I'm just waiting for her to just get added to our Insta as well. On Jhilmil is unable to join, it's saying.
I'm sitting right here, so it says, I think it's coming up now.
Yeah, okay, let's hope so. Yeah, yes, happened.
Okay, so thank you so much, Chaitali.
All right, Jhilmil, would you like to start by maybe just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jhilmil Breckenridge. I identify as a survivor of psychiatry. And I work a lot in the trauma-informed approach, alternative ways of looking at distress. For example, the socio-political way, not calling it a mental illness, but calling it a psychosocial disability, and various other ways like poetry as therapy, narrative writing as therapy, and many such approaches which are different from just the medication and the biomedical approach.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I head a Bhor Foundation, which is a Delhi-based charity, and we work a lot in the field of peer support.
And can you tell us a little bit about what peer support looks like, Jhilmil?
Yeah, so our peer support, sorry, I'm trying to turn off all the speakers because I'm getting, okay. So we run this thing called the listening circle, and the listening circle meets. We have 4 circles in Delhi, and they meet about once every 1 or 2 weeks. And we even have one in Bangalore, in fact, which meets in Cubbon Park about once a month. And we believe that no one is the like a therapist or a psychotherapist is not needed. everyone is the expert of their own lives, and just by talking and sharing, they are able to connect, get a lot from that. So that's what we do. So it's 1 hour of talking, and
Ah,
then
okay.
one normally is poetry as therapy, or
Oh, wow.
art, or some mindfulness practice that we do. So it goes really well. It's been going on now for over a year, and we've had a lot of circles and a lot of interest. I think the press is interested. People are really interested because the way it's different is that it's non-hierarchical. We don't have an expert. So that's how we believe that it's different.
Interesting. Yeah, I also wanted to quickly offer some context to the minority mental health aspect of this talk. So we came upon this idea thanks to Nami. Nami is the one that started this concept in the States, where Minority Mental Health Awareness Month became a thing, and one of the main reasons for that was to recognize the unique dilemmas of those who are at the margins, what one needs to do in terms of cultural competence, or what one needs to do in terms of building more contextual practices in mental health, and also ways in which people can build more access to mental health, because it was recognized that there is no equitable access to mental health, even if you have one of the highest ratios of mental health professionals that exist in the United States. But a black man or a Hispanic woman won't have as much access as a white man or a white woman to something like a mental health professional. And what could be ways in which we could build advocacy or build practices that could change that in underserved communities? I think that's something that we want to reflect on, and also want to reflect on some of the questions that we're getting from our users right now about just specific unique dilemmas and thoughts that go through their head about the idea of being an outsider, or being a minority in some of these communities. So I'm just quickly going to share one of the first questions that's come to us, Jhilmil, and whatever
Sure.
thoughts you have on that, maybe we could start from there.
Yeah.
So someone's asked us that how can minorities recover from damage and feel value and self-worth in societies when they are riddled with racist and or colonial histories and discrimination issues?
That's an excellent question. And I think the first thing is to realize where these are coming from. So I think in the question itself are all the answers. We have, the racism has been mentioned, the colonialism has been mentioned. So
Yeah.
first of all, to decide, to just accept that yes, I am a minority because of these reasons. Because half the time, most people don't even realize that they are a minority because they haven't thought enough about these issues. But in this question itself, it shows that this person has indeed thought about it, and that itself is I think, half the battle is won, because once you have realized that these are the issues holding you back, you are then able to create safe spaces for yourself, or even create advocacy, other movements like creativity as healing, and just build a sort of a tribe away from these, or finding people with shared goals. I think that itself gives a lot of power, and a lot of just a lot of support. For example, just in the last few years, the queer movement has been growing,
Yeah,
or the Dalit
absolutely.
movement has been growing. Now we even
Hmm.
have something called the Blue Dawn, which is specializing in Dalit practices and mental health, specifically for them. And I think when you group together under those identities at a time when you're still marginalized, it will definitely give you power, and you'll be able to resist, and you will be able to regroup, and that will be great.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. That's a really meaningful thought. Um, yeah, I think as you're absolutely right in pointing out, right, like that in the last years, there are certain movements that have really shown us the way in terms of what could happen with something like advocacy, or with also
Mm,
people feeling proud of their stories. That there are differences which make my dilemma and my struggle unique. And there are things that you, as a therapist or someone who is even trying to support me, needs to understand about my story, right? That And as you mentioned, like especially in even in something that's so appropriate for spaces that are oppressive, like a narrative practice, that also means even in a practice like that, one needs to recognize yeah, just even I think moments of resistance, right? To recognize that one still needs to acknowledge the cultural context of that person. So
Absolutely.
do you have any thoughts on what could some of our viewers think about or do, which would help them find such spaces?
I think, last year at our festival, we had someone who identified as queer and Dalit. And she said for her, it was really important for her to find a non privileged, non Savarna therapist. And so she really struggled and eventually found someone who she felt she could speak with. So I think that is one thing, that when you know that you're not comfortable in a certain way, trying to really take that extra, spend a little bit more time in commuting perhaps, or look online, but there will be spaces where which you can create by creating safe spaces for yourself, and realizing what is the source of your discomfort. Why are you uncomfortable? And if it is their privilege, or if it is a different level of education, then realize that, and then find what works for you. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking that, similar to the conversation that we were having earlier, that apart from, of course, the work that a survivor or someone who is marginalized already puts into their care, there's also a certain right that they should have in terms of expectations from the people who are providing them mental health support. Whether it's in terms of just being able to ask in the room that, have you ever worked with a dilemma such as mine or an identity such as mine, if they think that that identity is really at the core of the work that they're doing, or at the center of uh, yeah, just who they are and what they're struggling with right now. Those perhaps also might be some informal ways in which they could evaluate if that therapist or that mental health space is an appropriate fit for them, perhaps.
Hmm. And I think also, in addition to the words that therapists or practitioners say, I think it's important to listen to their body language. So while their words might say, yes, yes, I've dealt with it, but their body language is saying something else, I would say trust your instinct, and, really listen to that. And trusting your instinct is more important than listening to the words.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm getting one more question. Someone said that one of our users shared that at the end of the day, they often feel like they're the only person that exists for their own self. Nobody cares for them, and all their friends are not true to them. So, how does one overcome a feeling like that?
Hmm. I think, especially for someone who has a mental health condition, that can be a difficult and a frightening place, and really a lot of the journey of towards recovery. Although the whole recovery narrative itself is flawed, but a lot of that journey is very solitary. So a lot of times you do feel that, I don't have a family, or no one cares. But I think in times like these, reading really has helped me in the past, connecting
Hmm.
with the online community.
Right.
Although spending way too much time on Instagram and all of these other spaces can be detrimental to the mental health. So, it's a double edged sword, that, yes, you can find solidarity and support, and someone to listen to, but spending too much time there can be bad. So knowing that, or putting a timer on your phone saying, 20 minutes, and then I'll go for a walk. But I think those are some of the ways. And I think we had brought out a mental health anthology recently, and a lot of people had written in saying, I used to feel that I'm alone, and I'm alone in this journey. But by reading the stories of other survivors, they
Right.
felt, no, there are other people who've been there and who've walked this walk, and that helped them feel less alone. So I think just reading, connecting, and making time for self care,
Yeah.
nutrition and walks and all those boring things, but those are vital.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? That I think when we feel deeply alone, or we feel Like there's no one who will really get our story. um,
Hmm.
a book can be a better listener also, as much as a companion.
Hmm. Because the wrong companion is even worse. I mean, I was in a abusive marriage for 20 years, and so, and I
Mm,
stayed in the marriage for, because in India we have this thing, oh, think of the kids and what will you do in your old age. But truly, truly, staying with the wrong companion is so much more harm. And then, you find your own space alone. It's a much better space.
right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a super valid point. Yeah. And you put it beautifully, that how
Right.
wrong companion also is just as dangerous, or sometimes more
Yeah,
dangerous than.
and it's the same with friendships also. There are toxic friendships. There are, energy vampires, people you're always connected to. So I feel maybe uh, and in fact, I'm reading a very nice book about, it's like an ode to loneliness, and just
Ah,
all the essays written on being alone and being solitary, and how people often think of it, pathologize it, that there's something wrong with being alone, and oh, you should get out more. But she's actually written these wonderful, really thoughtful essays on how it's actually fine.
oh
And
wow.
she's discovered herself. So
Hmm.
I think the book is called The Lonely City, and it's quite
Oh,
amazing.
I love the title. But yeah, I think, yeah, on the topic of books, I will quickly give into this temptation to share another book title, which is, I was reading this book called Mohana Swami this week, which is one of the first queer literature books that's been written in Canada.
Okay.
And beautiful book, short stories about queer men in Karnataka, and set in
Mm.
different parts of Karnataka. And the author actually talks about the loneliness of holding on to his own secret of his queerness for
Mm.
until he was almost 50 years old. And
Wow.
yeah, but it's beautiful that he finally wrote it in Kannada. He didn't escape the language, but he at least he kept his lingual identity, while sharing this part of him that was really, really scary for him to share. And it's amazing, I think, to just see like these different aspects of regional literature coming into identities that we
Mm.
usually don't speak about, or don't even have the language for in these particular languages, right? So
Yeah. And I think it's so brave of all of these writers who are coming out and
mm,
sharing these stories. It's incredibly brave, and it's a way to push back against so many societal constructs. So I think that's
mm,
fabulous. Is it translated into English yet, or is it only in
yeah, yeah,
Kannada?
yeah. No,
Okay.
I can't read Kannada, so I had to read it in English.
Okay.
It was
I was
pretty
very
cool.
impressed that if you were reading Kannada literature.
But okay, so coming to another question that another one of our users has asked us, that uh, our users shared that I'm naturally super sarcastic sometimes, and sometimes I use the topics of race to ease my sadness about being a minority. Do you think it's a healthy coping mechanism?
It depends how it makes you feel. I mean, I think if it makes you feel okay, and if you do it with humor and sarcasm, and if you're not losing too many friendships, and if you're not losing too many people around you, I think it's fine, because humor is a sign of intelligence, sarcasm is a sign of intelligence. But I think overusing it can become a bit of a, you know, it can be harmful to your own self. And also, I find that if you are constantly looking at race, you might be analyzing anything that's done to you, or someone says everything is judged through that race colored lens. And that can be a bit difficult, because maybe someone is just trying to be friendly, but you may always take something in a wrong way. Or like, I live here in the UK at the moment, and often
Right.
people ask me, if I experience racism, and I keep saying, "Oh, actually, I don't really, because I don't keep judging everything that, oh, he moved away because I'm brown, and so
Right.
and so." So I feel that because I'm not so aware of it, but it could
Mhm.
also be because I'm privileged. So I'm
Sure.
conscious enough to know that that is, I talk a certain way. I teach in the university, so I know that there is privilege. But I
Hmm.
also think that constantly looking at race and being sarcastic can have harmful effects. But if it's done with fun and humor, and you're not losing too many relationships, I think you be sarcastic and and have fun with it.
Yeah, it can be a perfectly functional defense mechanism as well, right? And we all need those.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
to to get through a world that feels really difficult. And I was thinking about what you were saying, right? That that even though sometimes the goggles of what has usually bothered us or what has usually been a problem in our life sort of
Hmm.
ends up affecting all our future experiences in some way or the other, but it's so hard to remove that as well. Uh, that once you have been a minority identity and that's how you've been treated all your life, how do you do that? How do you remove that lens?
I feel the way to do it, although you may not be asking a question, you may just be stating it as a rhetorical thing, but I feel that by being with people who are not our own race, who are other races, other cultures, I think it's somehow and realizing that everyone hurts, everyone wants love, everyone wants I think things that everyone wants are universal. So I think we are we are joined on all of those things more than the things that divide us. But sadly, when you start looking at the divisive factors, we have a lot of just only looking at this is how we're different, this is how we're different. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering that because so just before we started this EMA, Jhilmil and I were briefly talking about the work she's doing right now, and she's talking about her doctoral work, which sounds super interesting. And and she was telling me a little bit about her own story. Is it okay if I share a little bit of that, Jhilmil?
Yeah, yeah,
All
sure.
right, thanks. So she was telling me a little bit about her own experiences with mental health institutional spaces, especially. And I was wondering that in the context of whether it's gender or race, did you encounter any particular identity struggles while you were in an
Right.
institutional space?
So when I was in the first one, which was a private hospital in Delhi, I found that the reasons why women were often locked up were different from the reasons why men were locked up. So that was
Hmm.
interesting because, for example, one woman was locked up for having an affair. One
Right,
woman was locked up because her husband wanted to take control of their property, which was worth a lot of money.
right.
So these reasons did not seem as many as so many as mental health reasons, but they seemed more like values on morality and
Hmm.
having an affair is bad and or with money. Whereas the two men that I befriended, one definitely did have bipolar disorder symptoms at the time, and
Hmm.
one was an alcoholic, and his family put him there to get clean. Now that's another issue whether families should have that power, but at least it seemed like a more genuine reason and not just an affair or property. So I felt that that was definitely uh, race. I mean, I didn't really come across that many intersections with marginalized communities, or perhaps I was not as conscious or aware because it's not something that I used to be aware of that much in the
Right.
past. Now, just because the world is making us be more aware, we are all tiptoeing around these labels and identities. But this was in 2007 and 2012, and back then I just was not as aware. And I'm, by the way, quarter of a Muslim, so I'm quarter of a so-called minority in India as well. So I am conscious, when I hear a Muslim name or meet someone, there is some sort of bonding,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't really pick on it in the institutions. The second one was all women, so I really can't say. I was in a kind of a ward situation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think what's also interesting, just I think building on what you said, that sometimes when we see these socio-political stressors, what we end up diagnosing as mental health concerns feel like such human responses to just what's
Absolutely.
happening to them, right? That it just, yeah, I mean, as you said, it just ends up, mental health ends up being a tool that gets employed for societal control. But how are you using it for the person in question?
Yes, absolutely. It's so important, and especially with domestic violence, the husband or the person creating the violence is normally the perpetrator. He's just let off scot-free that he's a, good, upstanding citizen of society, and the wife or the person who's at the end of the sexual trauma is often the one labeled or has a crazy tag given to her. But how has she got to that level of distress is not explored. And marital rape is something which we don't even talk about in India. Oh, this happens in all marriages.
Oh,
You just have to
absolutely.
put up with it. And these are the kind of things we need to start having these conversations. So it's really, really important.
Yeah, I get that. Actually, this question sort of fits in perfectly with this. So there's someone who's asked us that there's a woman who is using our services right now, and she's shared that she suffers from depression and she feels like an outsider in her own family. So she's asking us, how can I deal with that?
I think the whole quality of depression is that that's what it does. It changes people, and it's a condition. And I think being kind to herself and knowing that it might pass, it's a phase, and knowing that things, with the correct treatment, whatever she chooses, be it medication, be it therapy, be it anything else, or be it time, sometimes things are diagnosed incorrectly. I feel that, but having that kind of feeling that it's going to change, I wasn't like this. And if this is a new feeling that she's feeling not a part of her family, she didn't feel like that earlier. So I feel these things come in waves, and things can pass with the correct treatment and the correct modus operandi. And so, but then just to tell someone, hey, be patient, this all is also just toxic positivity. I think knowing that this is a hard thing for her, telling
Mhm.
her that this must be really hard for you, it must not be feeling very comfortable, but saying that, I've been there and it does pass, if that helps in any way. Then, and also just surrounding herself with self-care, a dark chocolate, whatever works for her, just knowing that, she needs to be doing something good for herself, whatever works for her.
That makes sense. Just finding small self-care aspects in her life, right?
Mm, yeah.
In the absence of support, as you said, that sometimes whether it's through stories or poetry, or
Mm,
as you stated, some of these small self-care habits on them can be ways in which we find companionship within ourselves when there's
mm.
really no way in which we can immediately find the sort of support that we need. That's at least one way in which we start scaffolding or start building support for ourselves.
Mm. And I think, I don't know if it's a possibility, but getting a pet is often a very nice thing at a situation like that. A dog or a cat or even a parrot. Not
Mhm.
that they can substitute for family, but the kind of unconditional love a pet can give, it can be quite amazing, I think, for someone with depression. So that could be something that one can think about.
That's an interesting idea. Yeah. If you can't find human support immediately,
Yeah,
you have
pets
someone
are
who can
great.
give far more unconditional love.
Absolutely. And they don't judge you.
Yeah, that's very true.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I was also thinking that how we started this conversation by talking about the pride that we're seeing, that some individuals are coming forward in terms of how they're sharing their stories. Apart from
Hmm.
that, I think one of the things that I would definitely want to address as we close today's live is to also talk about advocacy, which definitely should be happening in each and every community. And if there's someone who feels marginalized right now, empower yourself with your own story, with your own pride, and share that with your own community. Sometimes just sharing your story. Um, I think Jhilmil is a great example of that. That sharing your own story, how that can be such a powerful source of other people feeling heard.
Yes, that's something I've used in my work a lot, and I strongly suggest that that is awesome for all minorities, all labels to just come together and just unite, because truly everyone just wants to feel heard. So
Yeah.
that's how it is.
All right, Jhilmil, would you like any closing notes, any closing thoughts before we close for today?
I think just to say that mental health is for everyone. Anyone who's suffering now, it's not, you are not special. Mental health can affect everyone, and everyone has good and bad mental health, and it can turn into a condition. Of course, if you are minorities, and if you have, if you are further marginalized, there is a greater risk that if you're poor, if you have any other kind of marginalizing condition, a different caste, it just makes it worse. But to realize that we all hurt, we all want love, we all want to be heard, and then just creating those resources, whatever they are, and uniting, as you say, under sharing stories or meeting once a month or anything like that. And it really does help. Creativity and advocacy, these have been my two greatest ways that I have healed, and I strongly suggest them to anyone who's listening. And the creativity can come from anything: painting, gardening, poetry, anything really. Baking. I mean, right now I'm curating a book on cooking as therapy and
Oh,
cooking
wow.
as therapy. And so many people, and everyone has a kitchen. I'm not
Yeah.
saying everyone's a great cook, but try. Maybe it will help, because the act of creating anything is amazing. You just feel uplifted. You feel, okay, this cup of tea is, this is all right. So
Hmm.
everyone has that they could do.
Wow, that's beautiful advice. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I think what I'm realizing through the comments right now on both Instagram and YouTube is that um, while, of course, we've been specifically talking about minority identities as they're classified usually by society, but so many people are also sharing their stories of being outsiders, of feeling deeply lonely in just their mental health struggle.
Hmm.
and uh, and yeah, and I think your closing note is just, I think, beautiful and perfect for everyone who's feeling that way. That what is one small thing that you can do for yourself, what is a
Hmm.
way in which you can represent your own story, and how can you start beginning to reach out to somebody, because there are spaces where you can feel heard. Be sure of that. There are so many spaces that we have access to today, whether it's a space like the Bohr Foundation and the kind of peer support group work that you're doing in Delhi. And
Hmm.
thankfully there are so many places and spaces in all over the world right now which are doing such great work like that.
Yes.
And yeah, and we love the kind of work that we're doing at Wysa, whether it's in terms of the bot support, you can talk to a coach. So make sure that if you are feeling this way today, reach out to somebody. And yeah, and thanks, Jilmil. Thanks so much for your time today. I had a lovely time talking to you.
Thank you very much. Bye to all your viewers and all your followers. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.